Good morning, boys and girls. It is a pleasure to be with you this morning. I miss your faces. I even miss the complaining sometimes. I just miss seeing you and hearing your voices. I do want to pray with you this morning. I know I'm not the Bible teacher, but I miss doing that too. So even though you're home, I would like for you to close your eyes, bow your heads. Let's not have any distractions. I'm going to do the same. Let's start our day in prayer. Lord, I am so very grateful for our school. I'm so grateful that during this difficult time that we're still able to talk to each other, that the students are able to learn, that we're able to pray for one another. I have not prayed this much in so long, Lord, and sometimes that's why we have the trials that we have, so we can just recenter and get closer to you, Lord. I thank you for each and every one of my students, for the hard work that they're putting in at home, for the patience from the parents as they're on a new adventure, just like the three of us teachers are. Lord, we even thank you for YouTube. We thank you that it can be used for something positive like what I'm doing right now, praying on YouTube, on the internet. Lord, I just thank you for, again, each and every student, for Pastor Forrest. I just ask that you bless this lesson. May it glorify your name, and amen. All right, guys, thank you for praying with me. That just makes me feel better. And it may not be morning. It may be afternoon for you. It may be night. It may be the middle of the night. But I'm glad we can pray at all times anywhere that we are. So today you're going to use that blue packet. It's brand new. We haven't gone over it. It does say page 176 on the bottom. And I want you to raise your hand or a foot, doesn't matter, if you've seen this picture before. Or you can nod your head up and down. Do something. Have you seen this picture before? Maybe a thumbs up. I hope you did something. Because I've drawn this before in class several times. I think I even drew it last week, okay? These are elements of plot. Now, plot is the structured format and the way a story goes. It's how we get from the conflict to the resolution. And we may not think about it, but it is organized. We're able to follow the way a story goes. Now, some authors are really creative and they'll do flashbacks or flash forwards or go through time, and that's fine, but it's still organized and it's still planned out. That's why writers plan. These elements that we're going to go over are in all stories, they're in all movies, they're in TV shows, and they're even in video games. My husband enjoys doing video games. He grew up with those, and now that he plays some of them at home when I'm there, he'll show me the story aspects. He's a writer. He was going to be an English teacher, and he's actually written a book. So he enjoys writing, and he loves story. So I know there's lots of story in video games. So look for those. After we've gone through this, and I have a video for you to watch afterwards, look for these, even just in a silly TV show that you're watching. All right. So all fiction, and you guys remember those are stories that are made up, is based on conflict. That's the problem in the story. And this conflict is presented in a structured or organized format. And you guys can take notes if you'd like. You don't have to. In an organized format called plot. And we've done lots of plot charts in class where we have to write down the plot events. You guys remember that? What happened first? What happened second? What happened third? Now the exposition, so that's just the very beginning. It's almost like when you're on a roller coaster and you're going on the straightaway when you take off. It's the introduction, the beginning of the roller coaster. It gives you the setting. It creates the tone, presents the characters, and any other necessary facts to understand the story. So when you guys did your written book report in the beginning of the year, you had to do this in, I think, the very first paragraph, maybe the second paragraph. You had to tell me the setting where your story took place. And sometimes it changes. For Anne, for the Diary of Anne Frank, she's in Amsterdam the whole time, but the first part takes place in her house and the rest of it takes place in the secret annex. The tone of the book, maybe it's happy, maybe it's sad. Now we know for Diary of Anne Frank, hers is melodramatic because she goes through a whole range of emotions. Presents the characters. You guys had to share the characters with me in your book report and any other facts to help me understand the story. That's where I told you to tell me, are the characters animals? Is there magic in the story? Are the characters people? And how the other characters interact with the main characters. The conflict. So that's a big word, and we've talked about that. That's the problem in the story. It's the essence of fiction. And that word is the most vital part, and it gives central meaning to the plot. And it can even go into the theme of it, the theme of the story. So the essence of fiction is conflict. Conflicts can usually be identified as one of 5 kinds. So there's person versus person. Okay. An example would be Harry Potter. He's often fighting against Voldemort, or his crew of Death Eaters. There's person versus nature. An example would be Brian's Winter. If you guys remember, we read that, probably in January, and he was that 13-year-old boy who was in the plane crash, the pilot died, and he had to survive the Canadian winter by himself. So that's a really good example of that. Person versus society. So that's where we are for Anne Frank. She is against Hitler, sort of. He's not pointing her out specifically, but all Jews. So he's turned society against the Jews, in essence, as against Anne Frank. So this is what ours is: person versus society, person versus self. And sometimes that's where Anne Frank also is. She argues with herself, she doubts herself. Why am I this way? So sometimes some of the entries are person versus self. Then there's person versus technology. If you guys remember the Willy Wonka movie, it was the newer one, although for you guys it may be the only one you've seen. It's the Johnny Depp version. And the little boy, I'm blanking on his name, it'll come to me as I'm talking, but the little boy that goes into Willy Wonka's factory, his parents in the movie work in, I believe, a toothbrush factory. But the technology keeps on advancing and advancing, and there's fewer and fewer workers. And then finally, his dad is out of a job. Maybe both of his parents. Charlie Bucket is the boy's name. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it's the same in the movie. But so in that case, it's person versus technology, because his family became poor. And you remember in the movie they're caring for the grandparents. So technology was part of the conflict, because their parents didn't have any money. And that's one of the reasons Charlie was so excited to go to the Wonka factory. So there's some other kinds. These are the ones that we're going to focus on more specifically: person versus society. If you guys can think of any other examples, you guys read more than I do. I'm jealous of all the reading time that you guys have. I would like some examples. Any other person versus nature examples that you can think of? Person versus society, person versus self, person versus person. Oftentimes, if you're reading I lost the word. If you're reading everyday fiction or realistic fiction, there we go. A lot of times it's person versus person. You have a character, maybe a student against another student. But if you guys can give me any examples of those that you've read, I know a lot of you guys like Star Wars, that might be person versus technology. If you do like those nature books, for example, the I Survived books, if it's I survived a tsunami, or I survived Pompeii, that would be person versus nature. So give me some examples of those for dojo points. So that's the exposition, or after that, the conflict usually comes somewhere there. As the story's going on, we hit rising action, and that's when you're going up kind of the part of the roller coaster that you feel anticipation, and you can feel the car going against the stoppers, so you don't go too fast or fall backwards, and you're going up. These would be your plot events. This happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And the closer you get to the climax or the top of the roller coaster, kind of the more exciting they get. But that's the rising action. Those are a series of events that build from the conflict leading up to the climax. So you may have the conflict somewhere down here. Usually in the exposition, you find out what the problem is. Sometimes the very first sentence you read, it depends how the author wants to introduce that to you. And then once you do get to the top, calm down, there's the climax. The climax is the highest point of the story for the reader. Frequently, it's the moment of the highest interest and greatest emotion. It is the point at which the outcome of the conflict can be predicted. Not always, but sometimes. We haven't gotten to that point in Anne Frank yet, and her story is a little bit different. If we were watching the movie, if you guys watch it at home, in the movie, the conflict would be different because you would watch them be arrested and taken away. So that's the climax, because you're waiting the whole time. You're reading how they're living in the annex, and then there is a burglary, and then we'll read later there's another burglary, and they're constantly in fear of getting caught, and then they get caught. But that's the movie. In the book, she doesn't write about being caught, so the climax is different, and it may not feel as climactic, but it is, because she doesn't write about being caught. After that is the falling action. So we will read the events of what happened to her afterwards. We've talked about it. You guys know a little bit. That would be the falling action. And then what happens to the diary as well. And then the resolution is, we know that they ended up passing away in the concentration camp. That resolution, the falling action, which is a good terminology for that, because if you're in a roller coaster, you're falling down, okay? And then you hit the denouement, and that's where the roller coaster would hit the last track that takes you into the station, and you slow down, and you eventually get to the end of the book, okay? And again, it's not the solution necessarily. A lot of times it's just a resolution. If there was a solution to her story, they wouldn't have been caught. They would have been liberated, either from the annex or from the concentration camps, but sadly that didn't happen. But again, these elements are in every single book, movie, TV show, and video game. So keep an eye out for them. We may have an activity where I have you find one, since you guys probably have a lot of screen time right now. All right, so this video is long, so I'm going to stop it, but we're gonna go to the next page. I'll show you before I turn it off. So we're gonna come back and fill out most of this. All right, I will see you in a minute.